My mother recounted this story to me after hearing it during conference calls, an emerging trend for parents. This incident took place in Laos, and although the exact time frame is unclear, it appeared relatively recent. I endeavored to capture as much detail as possible. For those unfamiliar, during that period in Laos, there were numerous small villages nestled in the mountains. In between each village, the Hmong people laid their deceased to rest. Consequently, the landscape featured a recurring pattern of village, graves with forest, village, and so forth. Now on to the story. It was an early morning, and a group of village boys ranging from 13 to 25 years old set out to the forest for a hunting expedition. Weary from miles of walking, they decided to take a break at a gravesite. While resting, one of the boys, in a light-hearted moment, took a bamboo stick, snapped it in half, and playfully mimicked a shaman, chanting, "Wake up, wake up." According to this makeshift ritual, if the two halves landed a certain way, the corpse would awaken. Otherwise, it wouldn't. To their amusement, the bamboo consistently landed as requested. Unbeknownst to them, their light-hearted jest would have unexpected consequences. After their rest, the boys resumed their journey to hunt. As the others went off with their weapons, the youngest boy remained behind to build a tent or camping site, awaiting their return with the day's catch. While gathering wood, he noticed what appeared to be red and green cloth materials gently swaying behind a tree trunk. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a person hiding. A figure clad in tattered clothes with rotten flesh clinging to the bones and gray hair revealing a visible skull. Overwhelmed by fear, he fired 5 gunshots into the air, hoping to signal his companions. Upon their return, the boys inquired about the gunshots, but the youngest boy hesitated to divulge the presence of the mysterious lady. Throughout the day, she stood by a tree, intensely observing him. As night fell, he summoned his oldest uncle, the 25-year-old, and disclosed the cause of the gunshots. Surprisingly, the uncle questioned why he hadn't shared this earlier. The boy explained that he feared revealing the truth might prompt the others to flee, leaving him vulnerable. He was a prudent and astute individual. The uncle, after assessing the situation, chose not to disclose the information either. Instead, he urged the boy to gather as much wood as possible to endure the night. While the clueless others laughed at their enthusiasm for collecting wood, the two hurriedly set out about their mission. Night fell, and while the other boys rested, the two sat by the campfire, watching as the corpse edged closer. They added more wood to create a sizable fire, deterring her approach. They observed her leaping onto the sleeping boys, brandishing sticks with fire at each end to keep her at bay. All night, they endeavored to fend her off until finally they hurled the fires at her. The weakened zombie retreated into the darkness, screaming. Come morning, the boys prepared to return home, passing by the graveyard on their way back to the village. Upon reaching the previous day's location, they noticed a specific grave with folded soil and smoke rising from it. Without much thought, one mischievous boy tossed a flaming stick into the grave. A few days later, all the boys fell seriously ill, prompting their families to summon a shaman for a ritual. The shaman, after entering the spiritual realm, encountered the old lady, who explained that she had taken their souls, believing she was urgently needed. With her departure, her spot for reincarnation had been filled, and she used the boys to expedite her progress. The shaman crafted stick dolls for each boy and burned them, facilitating their return to good health in reality. Lesson of the story: don't jest with the deceased Hmong. They don't take it lightly. My sister has experienced paranormal occurrences and she was much more resilient than I was in dealing with them. One night, she woke up to the sound of a little ghost girl crying near her bedroom door. The ghost girl started walking, and my sister followed her but couldn't find her anymore. Another night, an old man approached my sister, asking for her help. However, she was too tired and told him to go away because she is not a shaman. Months passed, and it had been a year since my sister stopped seeing these two ghosts. One night, I had a vivid dream about a little girl who kept bothering me. It didn't feel like a typical dream. It seemed too real. I brushed it off initially, but the little ghost girl continued to bother me, even appearing in my rearview mirror one morning as I drove to drop my brother off at school. I also started seeing another ghost, an old man who was much nicer than the little girl. These were the same ghosts that my sister had encountered, but they didn't bother her because she was tougher than I was. I confided in my mom about it, and she advised me to tell them whatever they wanted from me in my dreams and to stop scaring me. One night, I was too scared, so I sought refuge in my sister's room. I slept on the ground right next to her, but the little girl sat on me, which was quite frightening. I tried to grab my sister's hand, thinking it was hers, but it turned out to be the little ghost girl's hand. She made me lick her hand, and when I finally freed myself, I ran and slept with my sister on her bed. Exhausted, I went back to sleep without dwelling on the incident. In another dream, my dad was close friends with a shaman, and the shaman and his wife came to my house. The shaman looked at me with fear, indicating that I was not safe. I found myself waiting on the sidewalk at my aunt's house, who is also a shaman, but the little ghost girl wouldn't let me go inside. The next morning, I woke up crying, and my angry mother cursed at the ghosts, assuring me that everything would be alright. While dropping my brother off at school that morning, I saw the old man in my backseat. I cried, asking him not to scare me, and when I turned back, he wasn't there anymore. That night, I had a dream about the two ghosts in a bright room. The little girl passed away in a burning house, and the old man was her grandfather. He was grieving for her loss, and a few months later he also passed away. They were trying to find each other but needed help. The spirits apologized for scaring me and expressed gratitude when they finally found each other. I woke up feeling happy and shared the experience with my mom, who suggested that they came to me because my sister didn't pay much attention to them. I used to work in a nursing home during the graveyard shift when I was younger. I was quite apprehensive initially. The combination of elderly individuals and nighttime proved unsettling. Additionally, my coworkers from various shifts shared eerie stories about the place, further contributing to my unease. Allegedly, there was a female ghost that consistently roamed the north wing near the stairs. On the second floor, the last door of a specific hall consistently jiggled as though someone were attempting to open it even when the room was unoccupied. Over the months, I acclimated to the environment and my fear gradually subsided. During this period, I formed a relationship with a coworker who also worked the same shift. Periodically, she expressed feeling peculiar as though something were following her. I advised her to dismiss such notions, attributing them to my own nervousness. She consistently arrived at work fatigued, remarking on the sensation of a heavy burden on her shoulders. Despite this, I did not give much credence to her complaints, attributing them to the inherent challenges of the graveyard shift. The demanding nature of the job often left us feeling as though we hadn't slept, even after 10 hours of sleep. It is pertinent to note that she was a mother of 4 children. Subsequently, a Hmong girl joined our shift. For clarity, I will refer to her as Mai and my fatigued friend as Emily. Mai and I developed a rapport, and over the weeks I learned that Mai identified as a shaman. She shared that she could perceive ethereal entities at our workplace, dark, faceless figures lingering in the halls, appearing restless or confused. Regrettably, I harbored resentment towards Mai whenever she recounted these experiences. To my surprise, she divulged a secret, urging me to keep it away from Emily. According to Mai, numerous ghosts trailed Emily. Wherever she went in the workplace, these spirits followed her. While Mai acknowledged that other co-workers experienced similar phenomena, she asserted that Emily's encounter were particularly intense. Mai described the entities as resembling old people. One ghost, in particular, resembled an elderly woman with permed hair, wearing a pink nightgown. Initially, I resisted believing Mai, attributing her revelations to a pattern in my life where I encountered individuals prone to compulsive lying. I dismissed her claims. This continued until Mai confided in Emily about the ghostly presence. Emily, visibly frightened, demanded clarification on whether these entities were exclusively elderly individuals. Mai affirmed that this was the prevailing impression. Following this revelation, Emily invited me to have breakfast with her, excluding Mai from the conversation. Emily appeared agitated and uneasy throughout our meal. Eventually, she brought up the subject, inquiring about the ghosts that were following her. She leaned and whispered, "Do you think it's because I beat them?" Shocked by her admission, I sought clarification. Emily believed that the ghosts were former patients seeking retribution due to her occasional physical altercations with them, an aspect unknown to anyone else. While I attempted to address the issue of patient abuse, Emily was more preoccupied with the fear of these spirits persistently following her. Consequently, she resigned and the matter was never discussed again. My family moved into a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. My younger sister and brother slept upstairs with their parents, while my older brother and I slept downstairs. To access our rooms, you had to go through a small office room and then down some stairs. One night, my older brother was out and I was playing on the computer in our office. It was quite late when I started hearing whistling outside the office door. Initially, thinking it was my older brother, I opened the office door, which led to the hallway in the upper part of the house. To my surprise, the house was quiet. Everyone was asleep and there was no one in the hallway. I quickly shut the door, realizing my brother wasn't even home. A few minutes later, the whistling returned right outside the door. In a panic, I ran to my room. After that incident, I tried to sleep with the lights on, tossing and turning in bed. Eventually, I fell asleep, only to be awakened with a strange feeling that someone was watching me. The hair on my arms rose, and suddenly my body went numb, as if someone or something was holding me down. Despite being wide awake, I couldn't move, and my attempts to scream were futile. All I could feel were my wet tears, and I was in a state of panic. The only reason I broke out of this odd feeling was because my mom came to check on me. As soon as she opened the door, I leapt on her, explaining what happened. She dismissed it as a nightmare, laughed, and refused to let me sleep with her. Instead, I slept with my younger sister. My parents didn't say much about the house, probably not wanting us to be scared. In that same house, my sister claimed she woke up one night and saw a lady standing in the corner of her room, urging to go with her. My sister refused. Additionally, I heard our cat going crazy and rushed into the lounge. There, I found my dad sitting on one of the leather couches, and there was an imprint of somebody's bottom as though someone had been sitting beside him. My father and I looked at each other, unsure of what to say. He cautioned me not to tell my mother or the rest of the family. We didn't stay in the house for much longer. After getting to know our neighbors, they informed us that the house had stood vacant for years. Even when empty, they would hear a woman screaming at night, and lights would be on at odd hours. Only after we moved out did we discuss it, and my older brother revealed that he, too, felt like someone was watching him and experienced the sensation of being held down while sleeping. We all saw the lady, and the neighbors kindly informed us that a lady was murdered there. This is why, when I bought my own home, I decided to build rather than buy an established home, as real estate agents don't always disclose the history associated with the property, being more focused on making a sale. I live in Fresno, California, and I used to be employed at Chukchansi Casino in Coors Gold. My work schedule consisted of the swing shift concluding at 11 p.m. Typically, there would be a considerable number of cars on the freeway to and from Fresno. However, one particular night stood out from the moment I entered the freeway on my way home. A few miles into my journey, heading south on the 41, I noticed the absence of any other cars in sight apart from my own. Initially, I dismissed it, but after a couple more miles, I couldn't help but wonder, where are all the cars? On this warm summer night, I had my window rolled halfway down. Driving home, cigarette in hand and music blasting to help me stay alert, I experienced a feeling that defies explanation. At that moment, I sensed a presence next to my driver's side window. I swiftly turned my head to the left and saw what seemed to be the outline of a man. Not a solid, flesh and blood figure like you and me, but a distinct, cloudy form, somewhat transparent. This figure wasn't standing. Instead, it was flying parallel to my car with outstretched hands, reminiscent of the old Superman flying pose. I was traveling at around 70 miles per hour, and he maintained the same speed. When I jerked my head to the left, he quickly turned his head towards me. In that split second, as we faced each other, I shouted and simultaneously slammed on my brakes. I came to a stop, but he continued zooming forward. Fortunately, there were no cars in sight during this whole encounter, so I was fortunate that no one was behind me when I hit the brakes. This incident occurred in 2004, and as I continued working there, I would often see my skid marks on the road. I'm unsure if they're still there today, as I no longer work at that location. Nevertheless, that's my brief ghost story. It was back in 2010 when my sister and brother-in-law lived in an apartment in Tulsa, Oklahoma. My family and I resided in St. Paul, Minnesota. My sister had some very intense experiences with something in her apartment. She recounted that a little white girl from an older era came to her and pulled her spinal cord. This happened to her twice, leaving her genuinely scared. Concerned for her well-being, my parents, grandma, and I decided to visit my sister. We arrived at my sister's apartment around 9 p.m. Upon entering, my parents and grandma didn't feel any presence or energy, unlike me. I experienced a cold, shivering feeling, but I chose to ignore it. After having dinner and completing our nightly routine, we went to sleep. That's when the unusual occurrences began. We slept in the living room, where there were two couches, one long and one short. My grandma and my dad slept on one each, while my mom and I slept on the ground. The kitchen was across from us, with a small hallway on the side. Around 2 a.m., I struggled to fall asleep due to the unsettling feeling I described earlier. Suddenly, the toilet flushed and I heard it. I initially dismissed it as a plumbing issue, but 10 minutes later, it flushed again, leaving me frightened. I started feeling a presence in the little hallway. Out of nowhere, I heard a child running incredibly fast across the hall to the kitchen. I became super scared and covered myself with a blanket. After 15 minutes of silence, feeling hot under the blanket, I decided to get some air. As I opened the blanket, I heard a little girl laugh. Suddenly, she crawled super fast towards my face, blew air and poked me on my forehead. Literally poked me. Terrified, I slid across my mom's chest, sweating and shaking. She woke up, sensing what was happening, and comforted me until we both fell asleep. At 4 a.m., my mom's arm was no longer around me. I looked to the side and saw her sleeping on her stomach. Her knees to her feet were twitching and moving. When I looked down across her feet, I saw a little girl wearing an old-fashioned blue skirt and a bonnet hat. She was playing with my mom's feet, holding them in the air, chopping them, and laughing. I was petrified and didn't know what to do. I stayed awake until 7 a.m. and then fell asleep for 2 hours. The little girl had disappeared by then. The next day, I shared my experiences with my sister, but my parents didn't believe it. My mom acknowledged the incident but doubted that the little girl was playing with her feet. My grandma comforted me, prayed for me, and gave me her cross necklace and a Bible to keep in my pillow. Reluctantly, I spent another night in my sister's apartment with headphones on and managed to sleep without any disturbances. A month later, my sister and brother-in-law moved out. According to Hmong beliefs, if your spirit is strong, it will be scared of you. Unfortunately, I didn't have a strong spirit, and that's what happened. To this day, recounting the story gives me chills. Be a strong spirit, everyone.